Welcome to Undercurrents. Thank you so much for tuning in on this incredibly busy news day. We are going to right now break down the highlights of Donald Trump's inaugural address. It wasn't the longest address in the world. It was indoors inside the Capitol Rotunda. It is chilly here in Washington, D.C. The temperatures are low. The winds are high. I'm sure there were intense security concerns to be kept in mind. Susan Crabtree of Real Clear Politics, for example, has been reporting on how many security challenges may have factored into the decision to move the event indoors. It was very interesting to see everyone in the elite American political family gathered with, I don't know, let's say oligarchs, but James Billot, Unheard Newsroom editor, is here with us now to help break down some of the highlights, maybe some of the lowlights. James, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Great to be back.
Yes, and of course, make sure everybody, you can subscribe here on the channel. That's super helpful for us wherever you download your podcasts, and we have a premium experience at undercurrents.tv if you want to subscribe there as well. But James, I have this press release in front of me from the White House. They sent this out after wasting absolutely no time. The timestamp on it is 12:24 p.m. So it says President Trump's America First priorities. It's a rundown of a lot of things he mentioned in the speech. The first clip we want to just get everybody to take a look at is what Donald Trump said about male and female, about gender, because it got, honestly, one of the biggest applause lines of the entire address. So let's take a look.
As of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female.
James, what did you make of that?
Well, that couldn't have been any more emphatic language if it was possible. He said government will be recognizing two distinct sexes. That means passports, visas, any kind of federal documents. They will have a male option, they will have a female option. There'll be no more self-identification. There'll be no X. It'll be straight out with that stuff and straight back to the old way of male and female and distinct categories, which I believe Trump hopes will then spread through into the private sector. And as we've seen with many big tech companies, they are already adopting, getting ahead of it.
Well, and James, actually, in the press release, that section is under a sort of subheading that says bring back American values, which is interesting because it says the president will establish male and female as biological reality and protect women from radical gender ideology. And then it says there's two parts under the subheading. The other one is American landmarks will be named appropriately to honor our nation's history. Where Trump's energy seemed to really come through in this speech was the second half, and it was where he was dropping terms like manifest destiny, where he was talking about reclaiming the Panama Canal. He had an interesting moment where he said, this is, we didn't give it to China, we gave it to Panama, and we're taking it back. So not as though he was taking it back from Panama, but from China. He talked about renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. Those were some pretty fascinating moments. I don't know, I'm curious if you think, if your impression of mine is similar, that's where he really got his mojo, so to speak, during the address?
That seemed to be where most detail and where most of the energy came from, and I think it was the most revelatory period of the whole speech. This did feel like it was a passage or even a whole speech out of a late 19th century playbook, particularly the emphasis on Panama. I was expecting a mention of Greenland there too, but he seemed to be really worked up about Panama in particular, saying that the American ships and American Navy have been sold short for too long, China's overrunning it. And what was very interesting, and he alluded to this in previous press conferences, is that he would be willing to use many different means of coercion. That could be economic, but that could also be military. Did Donald Trump just declare war on Panama? I wouldn't go quite that far. But again, he's being very deliberately ambiguous about where he wants to take this so he can keep every option open.
And there were some specific things that he mentioned in the speech that are actually being taken into action right now. So some of those action items, let's talk about free speech. This was another big moment of the address. That again, frankly, if you told conservative activists that you'd have a Republican president saying this just a few years ago, maybe before Donald Trump, people would be like, wow, this is quite a change from what we're seeing on college campuses, and it's not the trajectory we expected to see from the country. So let's take a listen to what he said.
After years and years of illegal and unconstitutional federal efforts to restrict free expression, I will also sign an executive order to immediately stop all government censorship and bring back free speech to America.
Okay, James, what could that actually mean? Do you have a sense of what that could actually mean when it's translated into policy?
Well, my understanding is that the free speech stuff won't be happening on day one. That is going to be happening later in the week. And it all folds under the whole DEI, ending the DEI practice, defining sex, and restoring free speech values. And what I understand from what people have told me is that this is all going to be implemented through the federal government, through the federal bureaucracy, with a particular emphasis on higher education. He does have a lot of support here, and he has been in close contact with the likes of Christopher Rufo to help try and design this policy platform. But again, I think a lot of what we can learn here is just how much it's going to be broken down into various areas. So we have the cultural stuff, sex, DEI, free speech. We have energy, we have immigration. He has looked to tackle every single part of this platform and really start with a very productive beginning to his first 100 days.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point. What we know right now is like, just as this was all happening on Capitol Hill, new White House staffers were literally going through security. And a huge reason for that is Donald Trump feels like 4 years isn't enough, but also the conservative movement behind him feels like 4 years isn't enough time, given what they experienced in terms of, the literal definition of resistance from bureaucrats. And one of the first things they'll probably do is start pursuing Schedule F. Literally right now, they're thinking about how to trim the bureaucracy. This is one of their biggest campaign promises. It's one of the media's least favorite campaign promises from Donald Trump. And there will be images of bureaucrats leaving with boxes and ferns on the streets of Washington, D.C. I expect that to start happening very soon, James.
Well, I think just given when that press release was sent out, it was sent out during his inauguration speech. We've had, and it's smaller identifiers as well. Like Melania Trump, for instance, is really scrubbing up on her foreign policy knowledge and other particular relevant parts that she wants to pursue, but during her time in office. She's actually used this transition period to really work into that and prepare for that first day in office. But I think what will be probably the most the key priority of this whole day and of probably the week will be immigration. There are expected to be 10 executive orders surrounding immigration. That will include national emergency, declaring a national emergency on the southern border, designating cartels as foreign terrorist groups, ending birthright citizenship, restoring the Remain in Mexico policy, and restoring the death penalty. Now, one interesting nugget is he also wants to take on the sanctuary cities. And who could be a potential ally here? New York's very own Eric Adams. Now, there were reports earlier that Eric Adams was going to be attending the inauguration and in some kind of quid pro quo for Donald Trump pardoning him for his federal indictments. But if Donald Trump does find an ally in a Democratic mayor in a city as big as New York, it's the biggest sanctuary city in the world, and he can kind of cast a model for other cities, and they can actually do quite a good job of deporting some of these illegal immigrants, that might be a very interesting change in the country's landscape.
Yeah, he also, as you mentioned, birthright citizenship. That is a huge change. There's going to be a lot of legal challenges. Surely there'll be legal challenges to that. And he also the administration has already shut down CBP-1, which was this big achievement of the Biden administration. So they would say that allowed people to schedule while they were in Mexico, actually or in other countries, appointments where they would claim asylum. And they didn't have to storm the border or, obviously that was still happening because a lot of migrants said it was hard to get an appointment on CBP-1 and there were quotas that were never really clear, but that's already gone as of right now. Let's talk about tariffs, James. Here's what Donald Trump had to say in his speech about tariffs. He introduced the External Revenue Service at one point. Here's Trump.
Instead of taxing our citizens to enrich other countries, we will tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich our citizens. For this purpose, we are establishing the External Revenue Service to collect all tariffs, duties, and revenues. It will be massive amounts of money pouring into our treasury, coming from foreign sources.
James, this is not surprising at all. If you're a populist backer of Donald Trump and you look at him up on the dais with, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Google, all these guys are there. This probably makes you feel a little bit better.
Yes, and it does add some clarity, but there's a slight paradox here because on the one hand, he's got DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, looking to come into federal bureaucracy and federal government and to find ways to reduce costs and slim down bureaucracies and agencies and whatnot. And yet here he is creating another one altogether. What's slightly confusing is that with this tariff external revenue service is that This is already conducted by other departments, the US Commerce Department and the US Customs and Border Protection. So what Trump could be signaling here is actually, I think these agencies are not doing a good job. They are not collecting the duties and revenues from other nations, and they are not collecting the taxes on trade that I want. So I might disband with those or shrink them in some capacity and start a new one of their own and staff them with my own people. Again, this sort of plays into that whole Schedule F initiative that he wants to engage in too. So there's not necessarily a contradiction, but I'm intrigued to see exactly what he does with those two existing agencies.
Yeah, and I mean, this is all happening right now. Like, this is, the Wall Street Journal reported actually on Monday that he's, the executive order on trade singles out China as well as Canada and Mexico for evaluation. This is according to Politico, but does not impose either a universal baseline tariff or tariffs on select trading partners, as, quote, many countries feared. That contradicts Trump's promise in November to impose 25% tariff on Mexico and Canada on his first day in office in an effort to crack down on illegal migration and the flow of fentanyl into the United States. They continue, the decision is likely to irk backers of the hawkish tariff agenda Trump outlined on the campaign trail. What do you make of that, James? Are they reading too far into that? Is this a day one situation that could change literally on day two?
Right.
Tell us more.
Well, one thing that a lot of Trump allies have been keen to stress, at least behind closed doors, is that some of those more aggressive tariff positions were very much opening positions. They're a way to not only get these rival countries to the table, but also to send a clear message. We're not going to be messed around here. So I don't necessarily think it'll be a square peg, round hole situation. I think Trump will look to tailor his tariffs depending on what deals are being offered, what transactions are being offered. He knows that there's every country he's looking to do a tariff deal with, there's always a deal to be done on the side as well. So I don't think he'll be coming in hammer and nail, 25%, 25%, 25%. He might do something a bit more aggressive with the likes of China, but I would be very surprised if there wasn't a bit more development and tailoring to some of these, some of America's erstwhile allies.
And any other points that stood out to you, James? I mean, there was a lot. It wasn't the longest speech in the world. It definitely wasn't American carnage. And we're not seeing American carnage Trump in Washington right now. What we're seeing is all of his aides tweeting about the golden era. There were lines in the speech about sunshine pouring over the world. It was written clearly to sort of reframe Make America Great Again, which implies that it's not great right now, to juxtapose it with an immediate sense of optimism, an immediate sense, an urgency about the better future happening like now. So is there anything, I mean, Donald Trump is right now mingling with leaders in Washington. He's I think very classic Trump, even if that speech wasn't a rally. But as he's, meeting with members of Congress, former presidents, maybe not future presidents, but former presidents, he's with his family, barren looking, 10 feet tall, Melania looking incredible. Ivanka is here. All of these people are in town and mingling with him. There will be a ball and all of that. What else stood out to you from the address and even just from his first hour or two as president?
I want to zero in on one word you mentioned there, which is urgency. Now, we often hear presidents in the past saying, we are going to act with speed like the likes of which you've never seen before, but then they kind of get through their first 100 days very sluggishly without any real accomplishments. To Trump's credit, yes, we've had all these executive orders, 10 of which came on Monday, but he also declared 2 emergencies, one on the southern border and a national energy emergency where he's going to be ending electric vehicle mandates, he's going to be unearthing the liquid gold in places like Alaska, which he spoke about, and restoring America's strategic reserve. This is important because those first 100 days are going to be critical. He has both houses of Congress and he has 2 years to really get some of these things done.
In a very slim minority
the fact he's doing
in the
this with
House,
such
right.
It's a very slim minority. But again, he's really setting the tone in this even in these first few hours by declaring 2 emergencies, 2 of which I think should be quite palatable to Republican allies, no matter whether you're on the populist end or the more establishment end. So that's one aspect. I thought the other interesting aspect was just how many Silicon Valley and tech figures were there. We had Google CEO, had Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, the All-In crew, or at least some of them from the All-In podcast, and David Sachs will obviously be there.
Sachs is in the administration.
Chamath and all that
right.
lot. Well, exactly. He's the crypto czar. So he really is tying the fate of these Silicon Valley billionaires and these big tech billionaires to the Trump administration. And it's difficult to see whose strings are being pulled here, if there are any, and whether this is a sort of marriage of convenience or this is the start of a really deeper forged bond that can go on beyond these 4 years. But again, I think that'll definitely be one to watch in how Trump's relationship with these figures evolves over that period.
Yeah, that is a great point. Lee Fong, our friend, posted, over the next decade, Silicon Valley will replace blue and white collar workers with AI and outsource more jobs overseas. Truckers, designers, engineers, lawyers, and far more. Power will flow to the dozen tech overlords standing next to Trump in his inauguration. Ominous optics, and that's with a picture of Jeff Bezos, Sundar Pichai, Elon Musk gathering for the inauguration. I replied to Lee with just some additional reporting, at least, is that there are tons and tons of staffers going into this administration, mid-level jobs, some of them in high-level jobs, who came of age during the sort of power reckoning, the antitrust reckoning, to get it even more sort of niche-y and policy and wonky, during the first Trump administration, where people said these cultural problems are downstream of economic concentration. We have to crush the economic concentration to restore the culture. Now they feel like the wind is culturally at their backs, as the sort of the cultural freeze is melting. So the question then becomes, do they even prioritize antitrust? And I think that's at least going to be the fight to watch in terms of where populism goes in the 2020s for the left and the right. Is does the Trump administration, how does the Trump administration battle internally with the people who actually want to break up some of Donald Trump's new friends' biggest businesses?
I completely agree, and it'll be interesting to watch people like his own Vice President J.D. Vance, who would definitely consider himself at the more protectionist end of the spectrum, despite having had some experience with the Silicon Valley type. So I will be just as interested to watch not only Trump, but some of his surrogates and allies, and see which direction they go in and exactly where this pulls the MAGA coalition. We already saw the fragility of this coalition with the H-1B visa debate, and I'm curious to see how that will unfold over the next few years too.
Yes, the person to watch is Gail Slater. People probably heard about her when Pam Bondi was in her confirmation hearing, finding some common ground with Amy Klobuchar, someone who's led on antitrust in the Senate. So it's a wonky issue, but it's really the one to watch. It was the one to watch in the Biden administration, and it's the one to watch going forward, because it just is going to not only set the tone, but also the substantive direction of the populism ahead. All right, James Billot, Unheard Newsroom editor, so much to break down and digest. We'll be here all week, and we will be here into the future covering the developments from the Unheard Washington Bureau and the New York Bureau. So thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And everyone, make sure to subscribe here on the channel. It helps so much. Wherever you get your podcasts, and over at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of the show.